Dr. Penny Armstrong, I'm so glad to finally get to talk to you. Sit down. You've had quite a journey. So let's just kind of back up and talk about how you got from being the administrator, author, to a death doula. What a journey that's been.
Yeah, and I can see where that might sound a little peculiar. There might even be people who would find humor in that. But the reality is that I was a school administrator for most of my professional career, classroom teacher first, and then on into school administration, which I loved. I went into semi-retirement a few years ago, and from there moved into coaching, education coaching, and people coaching in general. And that led me to the end of life doula work. As I was working with people, I was understanding other dimensions of life and finding that many of the skills that go into being an effective administrator and a useful and effective coach also go into helping folks as they're approaching the end of their lives.
We were talking about that there's a sense of grief that's going on possibly in education today, and you do a lot of grief work. And I thought, well, maybe there's some tips you can give all of us who are feeling like, well, it used to be like this, and now it's like this.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. Of course, I have continued a deep interest in education. I continue to be a significant voice on behalf of teachers and the fields, not only of public-private education, but also the folks who are trying to homeschool and um, all of the variations right now as I think we're all together trying to figure out how do we prepare this next generation for a world that we don't even understand. We really can't predict what they might expect. As I've looked at teachers, something that has stood out to me in my work as an administrator, as well as the work I do in coaching now and end of life, is that people are experiencing two things. One is tremendous grief over the loss of how they understood things once were and how they are today, and knowing what do they do with that. And the second area I hear and see and read a lot about is just flat out loneliness. People feel very isolated in the world today. I just read a study where communications between people, just like what we're doing right now, in the last 10 years has dropped 30%. Now you stop and think that one out of every three conversations we used to have, we're not having anymore. And much of the communicating that we do participate in is very rushed. We're feeling a sense of pressure, shortness of time, for teachers, shortness of resources, and the dollars they need to attend to a very complex student body that continues to come through the door.
When I did my research for my polyvagal book, I went to look for happy teachers, like where are they? what do they have going on? And the one thing ties right into what you're saying about loneliness. The one thing that made all the difference for them is they had someone on campus that they've considered a good friend, someone on campus that they considered had their back. If they had a rough day or rough experience, they could sit with that person and talk with them. So I think as we talk about, and we've talked about that with the grief process too, like the parallels between when you're grieving, how important that co-regulation is. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, what you see with the grief work?
Oh yeah, we again as a culture have kind of distilled grief down to a number of steps. And there are good theorists out there who have come out with the various steps. I'm not negating their work at all, but I am going to say that emotions are not on a timetable. I wish they were. Wouldn't that be great if we could say I'll be angry for 20 minutes and then I'll be fine?
I'm on my fourth step. I got one more step to go and it'll be all sunshine.
Yeah, and I've crossed the finish line. Yeah, it really is true. As I have worked with folks who are experiencing grief or taught classes on grief, one of the things that has stood out to me is how much people hold inside about the sadnesses they've experienced and are almost embarrassed to say, my friend died 4 years ago and I still can't think about her and not cry. Those very tender statements. And in addition, that I know we're walking a little bit here outside of the scope of education, but my work that I do with people who have lost companion pets, enormously painful. And our culture, society particularly, doesn't really endorse much of that. You're really supposed to, if you have to put the animal down, put it down, get another one if you want another one. So I think about with our teachers, I wonder, where do they go to find a sense of safety that's big enough for them to talk about their sadness, their grief, and maybe even their loneliness in schools that I think sometimes feel very siloed and almost strange. The predictability of knowing if something goes wrong, where do they go for help, and can they count on that help? If there's a child that's struggling, can they go to the parents? If it doesn't work with the parents, are there next steps they can count on? These are big questions in a classroom that's expecting so much from that one person standing up by the desk.
So much of the polyvagal work that I've been doing is not so much about acknowledging feelings as it is checking in to see what the nervous system is needing. And when we talk about loneliness and we talk about teachers being in that shutdown place, that's a nervous system state of shutting down. I'm hearing that right now in the education world. It feels like for a while we were fighting. Like when you wrote your book about what teachers want in reform, and you interviewed all those teachers, administrators. I mean, you did this really big study, right? And I think at that time they were a little bit more in fight and a little more sympathetic, meaning, but in a healthy state of sympathetic, like a blend of sympathetic and ventral, where we can talk about what's going on and here's what we see we need to do. And if you'll just listen to us, we can get this squared away. And we were talking about how the autonomy is just gone now. And so the teachers have, if we look at Deb Dana's ladder, Deb Dana's the person who's really brought polyvagal into a practical therapy world. You start at the top of ventral, where you're at the top of the ladder, you can see around you, you can negotiate what's going on in the world, and these things happen, but we're okay with it all. But then as we move down that ladder, we go, no, we're going to fight for what we know kids need. We're going to fight for what we know we need in our schools today. But then that's all been taken away. Like, you're from Fort Worth, Dallas area, right? So you know firsthand when the state comes in, takes over, and you've had 800 to 1,000 teachers have quit, right?
Yep.
Quitting, walking out, done is dorsal vagal. That's the bottom of the ladder where you cannot see any resolution to the situation. And the only thing you can do is shut the door to that career, walk out, and go find something else.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tragic what's happened here in Fort Worth ISD. We have seasoned teachers. I mean, the ones who honestly are the backbone of a school, who have just up and left the district and said, I can't take it anymore. They have lost really full authority in their classrooms. I don't know how a teacher can do what they need to do and lose authority over their curriculum and over the classroom management that has to go on if people are going to be able to learn, are going to be able to listen. One of the things I loved about your book that I really grabbed was how teaching is a physiological event. It's physiological. I thought about that because we don't think that way. We think teaching is an intellectual event, and of course it is. But just like with the kids, what you have talked about in your book, if the kids do not feel safe, if they do not feel like they can learn something, we know traumatized brains do not learn. Frightened brains cannot process information. All they can do is try to survive. And I wonder, as we look at our teachers and the trauma that I think many times they're coming to school, first period of the day, the trauma that they're experiencing, how it is that they are finding the capabilities to begin the process of self-regulation. In your book, you talk about it's all about co-regulation, that the children regulate according to the teacher. So one of my questions here is I'm looking at our profession that we're so committed to. How do we help teachers get to a point where they can recognize how serious it is that they have to be able to find a sense of personal calm and regulation that works for them, going from that feeling like right now I feel like people would say, well, professionalism, a professional means emotional suppression, right? You don't feel it. You don't react. You don't do it. You're a professional. You don't do that. Knowing full well that emotional suppression is not sustainable. People can only do that for so long, and then they begin to collapse. Or, as you said, and we have seen in Fort Worth, they leave. They just can't do it anymore. Looking instead perhaps at a model, and this I teach in my end of life doula classes. I train end of life doulas. In my conversations with them, looking at what we would call emotional fluidity versus the idea of emotional suppression, which is typically what we do in a state of grief that we can't acknowledge, that isn't recognized.
That sounds interesting. What does that look like?
Yeah, well, in the end of life training, as you can imagine, the end of life doula absorbs just like the classroom teacher a lot of emotions going on around her. And the end of life doula comes into a setting, and one of the responsibilities, one of the goals is to become a place of calm and peace. If I come into a group that's experiencing terminal illness and impending death of family caregivers or whatever, I have to come in with a sense that I am calm, I am comfortable. I am a resource. I am here for you. Not really much different than a classroom teacher when she enters a classroom for her children. But it means before I come into that space, I have to do my work on myself. I'm going to go back to something that you said, that teaching is a physiological experience first. And in that, I mean our nervous systems are driving what we're capable of doing. If our nervous systems aren't comfortable, we can't ignore that, not for long. When I talk about folks in grief, one of the key factors to me is what we've already kind of touched on, a sense of community. If not community, at least one person. There has to be a safe place where a teacher can sit down and talk with another person in confidence and gather strength and co-regulate each other. Whenever it's possible. I know when I was a teacher and an administrator, we spent a whole lot of time laughing a lot because it was just almost beyond belief. One of the things that stands out in grief is anticipatory grief, which is something that hasn't even happened yet, but you know it's going to be terrible, whatever that would mean. And I think sometimes we get caught in that trap. Not so much right now is that bad, but boy, Tomorrow's going to be terrible. 2 weeks from now, when testing comes, whatever it is out there, that's going to be terrible. And our poor nervous systems don't know the difference between current grief and anticipatory grief. It's grief, and our bodies go into the resulting physical responses. So we're carrying not only today's problems, but the problems a week from now, 2 weeks, and so on. There's a lot of talk about living in the future and all that, and I know we all get kind of tired of it, but I do encourage people to back up when they're feeling kind of overwhelmed and check in on what's actually happening today. When we come back to the present, then we can find some room, some space for where things are okay, where we can be happy with what's happening with something. Might not be the whole big picture, but if it's as simple as recognizing the sun is shining, the flowers are blooming, the birds are out there singing. I don't mean to be trite about this. One of the things that I do with people is to stop and say 5 things that you can see right now, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. And just stop and bring that in, brings you back to your body that is flooding us, right? With all this stimulus going on around us, demanding our attention back to the very, very basics of what is our body experiencing in this moment. Give ourselves the space to do that. And from that, many times will come gratitude. When we look at what we're seeing, the 5 things, we do see things that we would have just passed by and not even noticed. It's a nice thing to do with kids too, in a classroom. Something else that as I have worked through this with folks, and then, like I said, I read your wonderful book. I really do think that people need to be educated on the nervous system. I think if anything comes out of our conversation today, I hope people will consider sitting down and really learning about their nervous system and how it works, because we are in charge of what's going into our heads, whether we want to admit it or not. We are. We may not like what's coming in, but it is coming in, and our poor nervous systems just react to however we're processing what's going on. And again, I'm not saying that we suppress anything, not at all. I think it's really important that we recognize what's going on and name it for what it is, but also start recognizing, what is my authority in here? What can I actually do about this? And what is outside of my scope? Because outside of the scope is where we get into anticipatory, where, if they would just do this, if they would just do that, and then our nervous system start up and away we go. And it is just burning what my Buddhist friends call the chi. It's our life energy. We just burn it up inside ourselves. And probably, I think as Mark Twain said, 80% of the things that I'm worried about never happened. It's true. It's true. So for teachers, I would say, if they can take the time to really learn about polyvagal theory, what's happening in these different stages, listening to their bodies, the interoception, I have a stomach ache, my heart's pounding, these signals that are coming up, recognizing them and making a decision. I have to take care of myself first.
I often talk about when I was a high school biology teacher and I had so many kids that by the end of the school day, I had 40 and so in each class. And for me, it was overwhelming. And after the first year of teaching, I was done. I just thought, this is just too much for me. But the kids in the class, a lot of them couldn't read their biology books. And so I had this little nudge that said, well, why don't you go get your reading specialist credential? And then you could work with these kinds of students in smaller groups. and you could get to know them. See, I'm one of these people that I'm not the big, I never went to the parties where there are a lot of people. I like a small group, an intimate group, and I like to get to know them. And that got lost in the classroom. And I know there's some teachers who do a great job with the big groups. They're very extrovert. They have a lot of that energy and they love it. So when I went back to school, then I was able to take these smaller groups of high school students, start these little smaller group reading programs, get them reading at grade level. And then I went to elementary school and I always had like 5 to 7 to 10. And that was good for my nervous system. I didn't know any polyvagal at the time, but I listened to what was going on, that this is too overwhelming. I had all these kids and I coached 2 sports and at the high school, and it was just a lot. And I sometimes want to say to like a listener out here, one of our listeners, that if they're thinking of quitting, there's ways you can do it differently. There's independent study. I taught an independent study for years, and I helped like the Hmong population get their GEDs, one of the most rewarding things I ever did. And then I helped them get their citizenship and pass their citizenship test, and we'd have a big cake for them. And it was so rewarding. And so we can still love to educate, but maybe the situation they're in right now isn't ideal. And maybe they don't have the support from the administration, but you don't necessarily have to throw it all out. I think there's listening's really good. And then trying to say, well, what could I do in this profession? Maybe I'm going to become a private tutor. Maybe I'm going to, I don't know, there's just other options, but I do think it's really important that they're listening to the stress that they're under, though, and let that guide them to another path. Like, okay, well, I started here. I look where I started. I'm a high school biology teacher. And it kind of came full circle writing the Polyvagal book because it was very physiological. So it was kind of interesting. And I actually was able to thank my high school biology teacher, Mr. Eggers, because he was so inspiring. And he inspired me to become that teacher.
I love that. I love that. And that, again, I just want to draw back to sometimes as teachers, we don't fully realize the impact we're having on a student. Sometimes it's not till years later somebody will come back and say, Mrs. So-and-so, I'll never forget when you said such and such. Or I'll never forget that day I was so scared you sat down next to me. I mean, those kinds of things that are the heart of teachers. And I think that's what pulls people into the profession in the first place. And I think that's the part that's being hurt so badly right now by not being able to really express truly what they want to do and what they're capable of doing. Going back to Polyvagal, absolutely. Something else that I recommend to people, in addition to finding that community you can sit and talk with, and if it isn't in your school, find people that you can just say, every Thursday, we're going to get together. We're going to get together at Starbucks. We're going to do this. And for 45 minutes, it's sacred. We're doing this. And we're going to talk to each other. And we're going to uplift each other. And we're going to support each other, which is the guidelines for. We're not going to sit and complain to each other, although there's a place for that. But for this, I'm thinking a group that is held together because of mutual care for each other. That's it. Is another thing I have recommended for people, particularly if they don't feel they're safe in the work environment to do that. Getting in the car and instead of ruminating all the way home about something that happened and you're so mad and you couldn't stop it or whatever, to put on a podcast of somebody who's funny and talking about life. Anne Lamott is one of my favorites. She just takes regular life and puts it in such a clear, healthy perspective and just gives you a minute to listen to her view on how life is going and what we might share with someone like Anne Lamott. When I'm coaching people, I stop and I say, what brings you joy? And it's astonishing how many times people can't come up with an answer. because they're not sure. Well, I don't know, and I think, okay, let's start here.
Let's just kind of talk about summarizing. What should, the grief work that you're doing, what we're doing in schools. Let's see if we can summarize what were some of the big, because we talked about some really good things. You want to try to do it?
Sure. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So you want to start?
Yep. I would say become educated on how your nervous system works. Number
Okay.
one.
Number one.
I would say number two, start checking in with yourself. How many times in the course of the day are you in each of those stages? I asked people for a presentation I did with teachers was to set out a calendar. We all know about lesson plans, right? Set out a calendar, and on that calendar, mark dates that you are going to do something for yourself, because deciding is not doing. Those are two different things. So transitioning from deciding to doing and getting it down in some format where a person remembers, oh yeah, that was important to me yesterday. It's still going to be important to me today. So marking on the calendar, just charting
Yeah.
when something was done that answered their hearts, that brought them joy. If it's just a tiny moment, that's fine. If it is, listening to a half-hour podcast and they laughed for a half an hour, good for you. But just charting it. I like with people I work with when I ask, how do you feel joy? What brings you joy? I have them make a list right then and there of things that they say bring them joy. So there's a resource they can pull from when they notice they haven't done anything in 3 days that brought them joy, because they're charting on their calendar.
The most impactful thing a therapist once said to me, I was taking care of my mom in Florida. I was flying back and forth from California to Florida, and she was really ill. And I would put things in place, like I would get somebody to come in and help her clean her house, and she would fire them. But she would call me all the time, crying, upset. Her life is just imploding. And I would go into fix it mode. I would go into, Mom, we'll get you a house cleaner. We'll do da 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 da. So I had to go to a therapist because it was very difficult to deal with. And he said, when your mom calls you crying and upset, this is what you're going to say. And I think this is really important for everybody listening. I guess it's one of the most powerful things I've ever learned. You're going to say, Mom, are you wanting me to listen right now? Or are you asking me for advice? And 90% of the time, I was just listening. And that's a lot easier. It's really easy for you to just sit there and go, well, I don't know. If you're a fixer person, it's probably not that easy. But I just sat there and listened. And, oh, okay, I'm just in listening mode. I do it in my relationships with my kids. I do it with my partner. We sit down and all this stuff starts coming out of him and about something with work. And I will just ask him, am I listening right now? Or are you looking for some insights? And sometimes I'm listening and sometimes the insights. It's so clear. It's so easy. And I think that, that maybe that's a tool that could be very helpful.
I always ask people when they say they would like advice, I always start with, well, what are your options?
And try to get it out of them.
Yeah, because I might have all kinds of advice, but frankly, it's not one of their options.
Right. Right. That's a good addition to, am I listening? Want advice? That's the next question you could ask is, well, what are some options? What are you thinking about the options? Putting it back on them to, and it would be marvelous if we had time in schools to do that with our students. I think that would be
Oh,
teaching
yeah.
so much.
Mhm.
Well, it's been a wonderful conversation. Is there anything we've missed that you think we need to cover?
Only that everybody should buy your book.
No, I didn't ask you to say that. I think the title has been a little scary for people. I think they see the title, The Polyvagal Path, and they think, what the heck is that? But I did write the book in a way that I felt was friendly. It does have the science, but it was in a way that I gave lots of examples of my own teaching and examples of with my daughter. And so I tried to make it as practical as possible, even though Norton wanted it to be pretty theoretical.
Mm-hmm.
I I just had to go into some practical things as well. I think that's what it's about right now in this world. It's like one nervous system at a time. It's our nervous system first.
First hours, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I've appreciated this, Deb, and I'm very grateful for your work.
Yeah, and I'm grateful for what you're doing as well. I think what a gift you must be to families who
Mm.
are going through what they're going through, the hardest thing that they'll ever have to go through, and for you to be there as this a regulating resource for them. Amazing. I didn't even know what you did existed until we started talking about it. So for people listening who might be going through grief or being at that stage, is there a national registry where they can find people, or do you have that at your website? Where should they go?
Yeah, I would say my website name is legacypassage.org. Legacypassage.org. And going into that, they will find out about end of life doula work and also classes that I offer and workshops that I do and so on, and also contact information. So if people had questions, I'd be delighted to answer any questions for them and see if I can support them in any way. It's just one human being walking with another human being through a passage that we all will eventually walk. But when my mom passed, I was working with the hospice nurse, and this would be now, oh gosh, several years ago. And the hospice nurse said to me, "Have you ever thought about going into being an end of life doula?" So that was really the first actual inspiration to do it.
One person. See,
One person.
that's what teaching is as well, right? That one person
Exactly.
sees something in you and
Yep.
says, "Have you ever considered?"
Yep. Exactly.
Yes, that's amazing. Well, thank you for sharing all your wisdom.
Well, thank you. I'm just delighted. And I know we will continue conversations, but thank you for this time.
Yeah, thank you so much.